This is from the 813. Says, Damon, you got to let it go. Jimmy will not and should not be on this roster this season. It's over. It's time to move on when they cut down to 53. Why? I don't understand. Why? If the entire point of going through training camp is to take a training camp roster that starts with over 90 players and whittle them down to your best 53 players, there is no doubt in my mind that Jimmy Garoppolo is one of the 53 best players that the 49ers have on their roster right now. There is nothing to discuss in terms of who is a better NFL quarterback today and is prepared to be a better NFL quarterback this season should the 49ers need to turn to their backup quarterback. Jimmy Garoppolo, Nate Sudfeld, or Brock Purdy. Why the reluctance to keep the second best? The two best quarterbacks on the 49ers roster are Jimmy Garoppolo, Trey Lance, and then the two other guys. So why would you keep either of the two other guys when you know for a fact, irrefutable fact, that Garoppolo is better than the two other guys?
Because this is San Francisco, and it has always hated the incumbent. Going back to John Brody, historically, it's show us the new thing, show us the new thing. And when you have the new thing, the corollary to that is let's get rid of the old thing. Only this is a different situation than all of the other ones, where you don't have to get rid of the old thing because the old thing is not standing in the way of the new thing anymore.
And he's already paid for, which is the most important part of the puzzle. Jimmy Garoppolo doesn't save the 49ers anything other than money if they cut him. And it's not money that they can turn around and spend to make their team better this year. It isn't. It's not. Jimmy Garoppolo, look, as a starting quarterback, he's in the middle of the pack. He's a middle of the pack starting quarterback that Kyle Shanahan, who knows more about this than any of us ever will, deemed it was time to move on from, which is why they made the pick of Trey Lance. Jimmy Garoppolo, cast as the 49ers starting quarterback, puts him in the middle of the pack of quarterbacks in his group. Of the group of backup quarterbacks, Jimmy Garoppolo is so far and away number one, top of the heap in terms of backup quarterbacks. There's nothing to dispute. Maybe you could say Sam Darnold is in that conversation because today the Panthers named Baker Mayfield their starter, and Sam Darnold does have starting experience. But I think Jimmy Garoppolo is probably the better reason. Somebody says, Damon, there's 27 million reasons why. Hello, they're already spent. They're already spent. The budget that will accommodate Jimmy being on this team has already been budgeted for. It's already been paid for. It's like worrying about the vacation that you've already paid for. Do you think we should still be able to afford going on this vacation? Well, maybe we can't. Maybe it was an expenditure, but it's paid for. So we might as well go.
But it does go back to what I said earlier, which is people just want him to be gone.
Right.
It's because it's not based in logic.
Right. It's fans that you're talking about. Yeah. I'm talking about what Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch need to be looking at this through.
Oh, I think they probably are looking at it that way. They've considered all of this for months because every day that they couldn't move him or that nobody was showing interest was a day when they had to think about, okay, what's plan B? So none of this is a surprise to any of them. I think, truthfully, that the only way that they would make the decision that Garoppolo's got to go is either if they really need the money, which again, can't spend this year, or B, they think he's going to be a disruptive influence. And I don't know that there's very much evidence for that. So as a logical football play, it's right in front of you.
Yeah. Look, it sounds nuts. It sounds crazy. It sounds like you're placing Trey Lance in an uncomfortable situation. Trey Lance cannot be made uncomfortable by the guy behind him. And if he is, well, then there won't be a guy behind him for very long. He'll be the guy behind the other guy. Go ahead.
No, it's this overwrought notion that you have to turn the page. You don't.
No.
One of the great things, well, and one of the crummy things too, is that a coach with Kyle Shanahan's level of power doesn't have to explain his decisions to anybody, not even Jed. And Jed's distracted now by Leeds United anyway. But he just says, well, we're keeping him. Why are you keeping him? Because he's better than the other two guys. And unless somebody can show me that they are really invested in either of the two, either Sudfeld or Purdy, and they want to bring him along, which is sort of its own weird, dangerous thing, because two unproven quarterbacks as your 1 and 2 seem sort of mad to me. But, I mean, the logic is there, and Kyle Shanahan would have to have a pretty decent reason, why he would just get rid of him for nothing. Because if he can't move him, he's probably better off keeping him. Because you can always fix your salary cap. Because everybody's fixed their salary cap every year since the salary cap was first introduced. Nobody ever started a year with a salary cap problem.
Keeping Jimmy Garoppolo wouldn't create one. I mean, it's just as simple as this. Would you, just yes or no question, remove the man's name, remove the man's track record, remove every inclination you've ever had about him? Yes or no? Would you like the best backup quarterback in football on your roster? Yes or no? Who would say no?
I think you're about to find out.
Well,
nobody in a position to make the decision. But once you start reading that infernal text line and taking those phone calls from Lunatic Alley, you'll find out.
I really think that Niners fans are just a touch smarter than that. You can they can get finicky about their starting quarterback. There is no doubt about it. But the question of who you would rather have, Trey Lance goes down first play in Chicago. Everything went wrong. It's a disaster. For the rest of your year, your quarterback is Nate Sudfeld or Jimmy Garoppolo. What are you taking? Who in this audience, who would rather run a 17-game-long Nate Sudfeld experiment or a 17-game-long Mr. Irrelevant experiment over the Jimmy Garoppolo? You kind of know what you're getting. I mean, the whole point of a backup quarterback is, well, you're going to play him and you really don't know what you're going to get. At least you know what you're going to get with Jimmy. And it's been good enough to reach one Super Bowl and get to another NFC title game. That's a pretty good insurance policy. What NFL team wouldn't be willing to plunk down $27 million on a season-long insurance policy?
But more than that, you don't have to spend any time trying to get him to cram the playbook into his head. It's already there. There's literally no adjustment. And unless he has not kept himself in shape, which seems to me pretty ludicrous, what would be the objection? I've always thought that people were in a hurry to get rid of a pretty useful asset. And, it's the notion that somehow this will make Trey Lance nervous. Well, if it makes Trey Lance nervous, you got the wrong guy.
Right, and somebody here on the text line says, wait, so Lance can't be uncomfortable, but the media made Jimmy uncomfortable all of last season? Crazy. The media didn't make Jimmy Garoppolo uncomfortable. Kyle Shanahan did. John Lynch chose to create that environment. It's just that simple. And the difference is, One guy's got no NFL experience. The other guy's got a ton of NFL experience playing behind one of the great quarterbacks of all time for the great coach of all time and is in the fifth, sixth year of his career. You should be much more entrenched in how the NFL works at that point in time in Jimmy's career life cycle than Trey Lance was. Damon, keeping Jimmy around is like getting a divorce and trying to keep your ex around in case your new wife doesn't get along. No, it's not. It's not like that at all. It's not like you have paid for a wedding with someone else and it's time to say goodbye to Jimmy. It's not. Jimmy is not like an ex-wife. It's the most expensive backup quarterback in the NFL. Take the money out of it. The only thing an NFL team needs to be is under the cap, which the Niners are. Are they more under the cap if they create the hole that is Jimmy Garoppolo? He's off the roster. Yes, they would be more under the cap. More under the cap isn't going to win a single game for you this year, but Jimmy G might, should you need him.
But that text tells you everything. There's this segment of the fan base that simply has fallen out of love with him because he's yesterday's guy. And we saw this in the 60s. We saw it in the 80s. We saw it in the 90s. We saw it, this last decade. The guy who looks like he's about to lose his job, they want him to actively lose his job. They want him gone. They want him in the Canadian Football League if at all possible. But there are times, and there are not many of them, but there are times when having the old guy around is a better choice because there aren't any good backup quarterbacks. There just aren't. I mean, it's a field of guys named McCown and Johnson. Those are the backup quarterbacks in the National Football League. And you probably can't name more than 15 of them off the top of your head. Not you, but the general audience.
Right.
So there is no downside here unless there is something we don't know about Garoppolo's attitude toward the team or his physical condition.
And somebody says, we don't know how healthy Jimmy is. Well, there's no team in football that should know more than the Niners right now. Are we sure he isn't recovered? Can he still throw? There's no tape out there. Yes, there is. And the Niners had pushed it out after practice. He's throwing against air, obviously. But that's all you're really going to get anyway. And here's the deal. This is why I would actually play him in Houston. Maybe you get something on tape that does make a team approach you. And if there is a trade for Jimmy Garoppolo, if there is an asset to get back for him, maybe you consider doing that. I don't know if any asset will return the same level of insurance policy if he is back. Someone from the 831 says, Damon, you say the Jimmy conversation never stops. It won't stop if sports media keeps up with the what-if scenarios. Well,
that's all you got.
That's it. That's the thing. What if here's the what if scenario that we're facing right now. What if no one comes for Jimmy Garoppolo? What then? We didn't think that would be a reality, but here we are. No team in football is coming for Jimmy Garoppolo. So you can either cut him, and then I'm sure some team would end up signing him, and you got nothing to show for it, or you keep him, and you for sure have the best backup quarterback in football should Trey Lance not be all that in a bag of chips or get hurt. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of a starting quarterback getting hurt in a football game. Raise your hand. Everyone's hands up. There. Well, Lucas, there. Ray, I'm going to assume.
I've never heard of that. That's a whole new thing to me.
It happens. I swear to God, quarterbacks get hurt in this league all the time. Even though they've bent the rule book to almost make sure that never happens, it still happens. If Jet is willing to pay, which he is, why not? Why not? Forget everybody's salary. The minute the year starts, forget everybody's salary. Doesn't matter how much anyone is making. How good are you at your job? That's the only question that matters. Not how much is this guy being paid to do the job. Once the year starts, the only question that matters is how good is he at his job. Jimmy Garoppolo, as the 49ers starting quarterback, leaves something to be desired. Jimmy Garoppolo as the 49ers backup quarterback is one of the single greatest insurance policies any football team has ever carried with it into a season. Think about what would be commiserate with it when Phil Simms got healthy and the Giants still had Jeff Hostetler on their roster. Is that it? Could that be it? And Jeff Hostetler wasn't a great quarterback, but he was good enough to play in front of that defense to win a Super Bowl.
Yeah.
You had to like the chances the next year. Geez, if Phil goes down, we got a guy on the team that could win the Super Bowl. We just saw it happen.
We got a bunch of guys who could win that Super Bowl, but none of them ever held the ball.
Look, I'm just saying there's no reason to not use this Thursday night as a testing ground. See what Jimmy's got. This whole, Jimmy, you don't have to show up. You don't need a playbook. You don't need to do. I said this last week, and I'm saying it again this Monday. You got 4 days to cram for your final, Jimmy. 3, really, because they're playing on Thursday. So you got 3 days to cram for this final. I'm giving him the first half. If I'm the 49ers, I am running him out there for the first half, if nothing else to showcase him. And if Jimmy wants to play this seriously, no, I'm not interested in doing that. Well, then you might have breach of contract, and instead of paying $7 million to let him go, maybe you can save the entire paycheck. I mean, I don't know. I'm not Don Yee. I don't know what it says in his contract. I don't know what insubordination does to an NFL contract. But I don't think Jimmy's that guy. He's a pro.
I think they can make this decision without playing him. I think in their ideal world, they could just let him go and just pay him the $7 million, which is why you should play the other 2 guys. See if either one of them creates a spark. And if he doesn't, then you just have a simple binary choice to make. Do we spend $17 million extra and have a much better backup quarterback? Or do we keep the money for the company picnic? That's it. There isn't a whole lot of time they have to spend fretting about this. And they don't need to see Jimmy or showcase him. All they have to do is just go, we know he's there. And if for some reason they don't like what they see on Thursday night, they've got 2.5 weeks to get him prepped as much as he can be prepped. And it'll be fine. This is an emotional thing now. People who have decided that Garoppolo has to go have now reached the point where they just hate the very sound of his name. And I kind of hate the sound of his name, too, for the same reason I hate the sound of Trey Lance's name. We never get a break from it. But for the 49ers, it's just a simple choice. What's better, $17 million or a really good backup quarterback? And they just apply whatever answers that they have that we don't have, and they make that call. And then they move on, one way or another.
Somebody says, I agree with you, Damon, but I think the decision has already been made. They're not going to change their mind. What decision? What decision? That they're going to cut him for sure? Maybe. But why would you make that decision right up until you had to? And they don't have to make that yet. And I think that they just saw Brock Purdy and Nate Sudfeld, and they know that a guy that everyone's saying, you got to cut him, is better. The entire point of having a training camp is to break camp with your 53 best players. Can't we all agree that he's one of their 53 best players? And if we can agree on that, then what are we talking about? What are we talking about?
Same thing we talk about all the time.
No, but somebody says you can't do that to Trey Lance. You can't do that to Trey Lance. Why? What do you mean you can't do that to Trey Lance? It'll divide the locker room. You know what will divide the locker room? A starting quarterback gets hurt and your season goes to crap. That's going to divide a locker room. I don't think it's going to divide a locker room. Everybody seems to be very much on the Trey is our guy wavelength.
You know what divides a locker room is when you don't make your best effort to have your best 53. Because every guy in there has a very finite career. And if you're choosing money over the better quarterback, that's what bad teams do. I mean, I think this is, like I said, it's a simple choice. Do they believe that Jimmy Garoppolo will be in the right frame of mind and in the right physical condition to be the backup if they don't like Purdy or, I'm drawing a blank now.
Nate Sudfeld.
Sudfeld. Yeah, yeah, I mean, it's just, you know, and if it ends up being Garoppolo, fans are just going to have to get over that because it's not going to be an issue. And if it is an issue, then you change quarterbacks. You put Garoppolo in and you sit Lance.
Right. And someone said, you know, well, what if Lance is really struggling through 5 weeks? Well, then you can go to the guy who's gotten you to 2 NFC title games. That's not bad. That's not bad. You know, why did they draft Brock if they're keeping Jimmy G? He was Mr. Irrelevant. He was the last pick in the draft, and he was a very good Mr. Irrelevant. He's a Mr. Irrelevant who might have an NFL future.
Because they thought they had a better chance to move Garoppolo back in April when they drafted him.
And there's that, too.
I mean, you can't take stuff out of the timeline. I say this all the time. Just at the time that they picked Brock Purdy, they said, this guy could end up being our third quarterback. And maybe they keep Purdy. Maybe they keep Garoppolo and Purdy.
That's the thing. So if you keep Garoppolo, Sudfeld now becomes the expenditure because one guy is the rookie that you'd be comfortable drafting and developing, and it wouldn't be like, well, you can't have a rookie backing up Trey Lance. You don't. You'd have Jimmy Garoppolo. Again, everything changes, or everything's the same until something changes. Nothing has changed. The X factor was going to be the offer that were coming in from other NFL teams that the Niners couldn't say no to. You got to make that trade. That offer has not come in. I know this sounds nuts. Look, I understand that I have contributed to the Jimmy needs to go conversation, but since he has not gone, I'm looking at this as Jimmy needs to stay. Just forget about the money. Forget about the circumstances. Forget one guy is in his first year and the other guy's. Is he one of the best backup quarterbacks in the history of football? Should he be rendered a backup quarterback? The answer to that question is yes. What football team, what football coach, what general manager wouldn't be interested in the best backup quarterback in the history of football should you need him? I know it sounds nuts. I know it sounds crazy, but at this point, cutting him and letting him walk for nothing is even crazier than keeping him on the roster. I play him in Houston if I'm the 49ers on Thursday.